Hello and welcome to IGPP Expert Talks. I am Heena Goswami, Editorial Consultant with IGPP, Institute for Governance, Policies and Politics, New Delhi. Today, to discuss the recent developments in American politics, including the indictment of former President Donald Trump, his dramatic arrest and later bail, and the recent leakage of notified documents around the war in Ukraine and other developments, we have with us Mr. Varghese K. Varghese K. is the resident editor of India's prominent English newspaper, The Hindu, based in New Delhi. He has previously worked as its US correspondent based in Washington and as political editor in New Delhi. He has written extensively on politics, political economy, society, and the foreign policy of India and the US, particularly the rise of nationalism in both countries in recent years and its impact on their ties with the world. His book on Indo-US foreign policy, Open Embrace, India-US Ties in a Divided World, was published by Penguin in 2018. Welcome to IGPP Expert Talks.
Thank you. Thank you.
To begin with American politics, the recent developments in US, particularly the indictment of former President Mr. Trump, his arrest, his appearance before the New York court, later bail, they look disturbing from a distance. Do you think that a reset button is being pressed for American democracy, or these developments have the potential to increase trust deficit amongst the Republican supporters of Mr. Trump?
Well, I think everything in American politics is extremely divisive these days because of the highly polarized nature of the politics there. So one segment of the population, particularly one segment of the Democrats, has been baying for Mr. Trump's blood. And this was one case which appears very dubious, including the Democratic, the prosecutor in New York was himself very unsure about the strength of this case. But however, due to various reasons, dynamics within the Democratic Party led to his indictment, arrest, bail, all that thing. It looks quite a stretch. What is the case, as we know, pertains to he paying hush money to a prostitute for keeping silent about an affair that he had with her. And now the prosecutorial narrative is linking that payment to a campaign finance violation. So the counter argument is that he could have paid that money for not necessarily for political gains. He could have paid that money for saving his marriage. There are various arguments to be made and litigated there. But at any rate, it is more political in nature rather than a clear case of a violation of law leading to a prosecution of. So what political impact will it have? Trump's base is charged up again. So he suddenly becomes a center of Republican Party's nomination race. He already was in the race. Now suddenly he is playing the victim card again. This entire argument of Trumpism, Trump politics, is based on the premise that he represents the working class people of the country, and he is being reined in, he is being constrained by an elite group which is controlled by not merely the Democratic Party, but also a section of the Republican Party. So his politics is against the elites of both parties. At least that is what he claims. Of course, his support derives from the trust that people have in that particular narrative. So for that segment, this prosecution only adds to their belief, adds to their prejudice, if you want to say, if at all you want to call it that thing, whichever way you would want to characterize it, that segment consolidates solidly behind him. So that actually opens other questions about will he therefore become the Republican nominee. There is at least one or two more people, including former Governor Nikki Haley and a person of Indian origin, Vivek Ramaswamy, who are in the race for Republican nomination. What happens to them? Will Florida governor, who is speculated to be a new potential challenger to Donald Trump, will he enter the fray? All those questions remain open. At the moment, what is clear is that there is a new consolidation of his own base behind Donald Trump. Perhaps the Democrats want it that way. So that is where it stands right now.
So when we talk about Trumpism, a new political discourse that, which has been named so, but it was widespread in the US even before the election of President Donald Trump. Do you think the recent developments, not so recent, but the election of President Joe Biden, the defeat of Trump-sponsored candidates in the midterm election, do you think all these have added a little to undermine the concept, the phenomena that Trumpism is? Or was it just a phase and, Trumpism is, the base is consolidating again and Trumpism is coming to power yet again?
Not at all in this. Trumpism is very much alive and kicking. What actually is Trumpism? It's a belief among a considerable segment of the American population that the American political system works to favor only a select few. Why do they feel that? Because despite America being one of the richest countries, when you take the country's entire economy as a whole, the underlying tensions in that society is very stark. It has one of the highest prison population. So many people are in prison. It is perhaps the only country among the developed world where life expectancy has gone down in the last decade or so. Suicide rates are high. General vulnerability among the population is high, particularly among the people who are earning subsistence wages. For them, the idea that America is a meritocratic society where if you work hard, you will be rewarded. That used to be the premise of US capitalism plus democracy model. So what has happened over the last few decades is that because the elite control over the university system, the political system, you have had a situation where the wealth, the privilege, political power is practically being inherited or being bequeathed from one generation to the next, and the other segment of the population feeling completely dispossessed. They and also they feel that they actually take the brunt of US foreign policy. They are the people who will go and fight the wars for American state interest. So there is a very evident divergence of the interest of different segments of the society. So while that is real, what Trumpism does is to tell the people who feel dispossessed and disempowered by the US political system, to tell them that, okay, you are facing this thing because of the elites one, and also because of people who are not like you, in the sense that he is primarily addressing the white, the working class of the United States, to tell them that what is due to you, what is deserving, what you deserve is being taken away by the immigrant population, or the profligacy of US foreign policy, which is distributing money. For example, the US is spending billions in the war in Ukraine. Trump is an opponent of that policy. So that has a particular resonance among the people who feel stressed, people who do not feel that they belong to that system, and people who think that their dreams have been shattered, and the idea that a better tomorrow is a guaranteed thing. That was a whole promise of US capitalism and democracy. That seems to be at a dead end. Those people are the constituency that Donald Trump addresses. Now, addressing, if you analyze that phenomenon, not only that we see no sign of that being abated, what is happening is that feeling, if at all, is only got strengthened even more in the last few years after Trump's first election, which was in 2016.
Political commentators have argued that the polarization that the American society faces today is because of the rising income inequality and the frustrations of the American working class, some resonance of which I found in what you just said. Do you think that the Democrat and Republican leaders are doing enough to address the core issue at hand, or are they just beating around the bush?
Well, because the thing is, regardless of what they say, the fundamental friction is in the US political economy is the friction between capitalism and democracy. So some prominent capitalist moguls of United States, Peter Thiel, for example, he said it is fundamentally incompatible because there have been debates about the one person, one vote system is how democracy's basic principle works. But capitalism does not work on that principle. Capitalism works on the principle that, okay, you will have as many votes as much as the share that you have in the company. So the influence that US corporations have in US politics, that is also a parallel debate. So there is a US Supreme Court judgment which makes which is called the Citizens United judgment, where corporations are considered as citizens or people. So they also have free speech and they also have the capacity to spend unlimited money in elections to influence the outcome, because they are also an entity as an individual voter in the system. So therefore, when we discuss income inequality is a broader challenge which all societies are facing, which is increasing because there have been, I do not have the figures to rattle off right away, but we've all been reading about the fact that, for example, during the pandemic period when everything was shut down, how the big corporations of the US was actually raking in a whole lot of money. When the US government announces a bailout during the 2008 economic financial crisis or any other rescue package that the federal government announces, the bulk of that money is actually being taken by the corporations and the shareholders of it. The owners of the capital get a larger and bigger proportion, increasingly bigger proportion of the total wealth that is being generated. That is how the system works. Correspondingly, people who are selling their labor for living, their share is coming down. This is established research. So even that is tolerable to a great extent, as long as people can afford a better life from yesterday. The classical US capitalist economy, the factory-driven capitalism, nearly guaranteed everybody a job and a predictable level of income increase as they go through different life stages, and when they retire, a social security system which will take care of their basic needs, medical care, etc. There is an ideological assault on the social security system that started much before Trump. Bill Clinton started it, and it continues, but still the basic structure remains of the social security system. But this guaranteed, the predictable employment and the income rise, etc., got completely disrupted by the entry of the new digital economy, where what practically happens in a digital economy is a second-to-second bargain a competition between the labor. So there is a global competition between the American labor with the labor of the developing places where the wages are very low, because it is no longer within the national boundaries. It is a global competition. An American wage earner will have to compete with the wages of Bangladesh, for example, in textiles, etc. One, And within the United States, because the technology allows you to do that, what does an Uber driver does? An Uber driver is actually real time bidding for a ride with another Uber driver. So technology enables you to suppress the wages to an unprecedented level. So more than the income inequality, so people, generally speaking, people wouldn't bother, okay, how much the highest income earner would be earning. As long as I am not ending up in penury, I am not actually going to starve, or I am in such vulnerability that between the two paychecks, my life becomes very, very vulnerable to all kind of uncertainties. In the United States, a lot of people have been pushed to that extreme level of precarity. So now Trumpism harnesses that sentiments and turns. So there is also the question of, okay, how the immigrants come and steal their jobs, etc. How the jobs are exported to other countries. So therefore there is a backlash against globalization and the globalized economic model. So all those things are based on real concerns of real people. Unfortunately, the people who are critical of Trumpism, who thinks that, okay, we'll vanquish Trump, let him send to jail, let us send him to jail, they are all avoiding proper discussion on these fundamental principles, fundamental issues that actually trigger and sustain this kind of resentment. Unless we address that, it is very difficult that the United States or any democracy will be able to resolve these issues. As I said originally, the fundamental problem that we are confronting is the conflicting frameworks that are in operation for the current model of capitalism and what a democratic society would aspire itself to.
So this crisis that is unfolding in USA, both politically and, as you said, the disharmony between capitalism and democracy, do you think it can and does have spillover effects for other democracies, including India? And what could be some of those spillover effects?
It's the same everywhere. So for any society which is trying to sustain an open market capitalism and a democratic political system, this conflict is playing out in different orders. Now, there are various responses to that. So I have interpreted and sort of commented on India's welfare politics. So what is India's welfare politics? So we have a free food program which covers nearly 3/4 of our population. Why is it? Because the prevailing economic model does not generate enough income for people to buy that, right? So you cannot ask them to go die, because it's a democracy. You cannot use force beyond a point. So the only way to get around that situation is to have welfare schemes in a manner that it does not redistribute to the level of reducing the income inequality or wealth inequality of any kind, but it gives the people some basic cushion that they do not rise in revolt. So that is something that many democracies are trying to do. That is what the United States has been trying to do, because there is a bit of expansion in terms of during the pandemic time, the checks that went from the federal, they printed notes, trillions of dollars, and tried to infuse into the economy as welfare. But then that caused other reasons, inflation and other things, that is happening. But yes, this problem is fairly universal, and different countries are trying to grapple and deal with the situation in different fashion.
You have written about the rise of nationalism in both US and India. in opposition to this politics, do you feel there are similarities between similarities in opposition to Trump and to Hindutva politics in India, and what are some of these similarities?
Yeah. So that again is it's a global problem. The centrist parties globally face a crisis. They are unable to have a firm, convincing narrative why people should rally behind them. Centrist parties, like say whether it is a Congress party in India or Democrats in the United States or the Labour Party in UK, all these parties claim to represent the interest of diversity, redistribution, a more humane approach to issues related to immigrants. Even in India, which is not, we also have a typical kind of immigrant issue about the so-called illegal immigration from neighboring countries, etc. So these parties face a crisis of legitimacy. Why? Because these parties over the years, they have been around for a long time. One, whether it is in the US or in India, these parties have allowed a kind of a clique that is taken off from this party. Power transfers from one generation to the next. You have this in India. The criticism of the Nehru-Gandhi Parivar is just one, but people have done studies about how in a lot of the centrist parties, it is only a few families, handful of families control power. So when you say control power, it is not only political power. If you look at judiciary, media, corporation, culture, Bollywood film, all these things, everything is being captured by a small group of elite. And those elites actually control the centrist politics of whether it is US or in India. When they talk about diversity or anti-populism, their ability to mobilize people behind them is extremely limited, because people perceive them as saying these slogans only for their own benefits. That is actually the shared challenge between the US Democrats and India's Congress Party, I would say.
So it makes sense for centrist parties to have failed, but can't socialism provide an alternative vision and alternative path for people?
So the populism or nativism or even the ultranationalism that we are discussing, whether it is a Trump model in the United States or whether the Narendra Modi model in India, they are not conservative in an economic model sense. They are actually practically left of center. They are actually socialist in a lot of their ways. Prime Minister Modi's redistribution schemes, welfare schemes, he actually surpasses the Congress in doing all that. Though he ridiculed Congress's welfare politics before he came into politics, it's a different ball game altogether once he is in power, because he knows that to remain stable, to keep some decorum in terms of social relations, that is very essential. Donald Trump actually breaks away from his conservative Republicans in guaranteeing that he will not touch the US pension scheme, the Medicare, which is the health benefit, guaranteed health benefit for people who are, I think, above 65 or who are bigger. So they do guarantee welfare. They are not anti-welfare politicians. So in fact, they are not. They may be socially on points about nationalism and nativism. They might be rightist, but on questions of redistribution and welfare, etc., they're pretty left. So that they actually beat all traditional definitions of what is left and what is right and what is center.
So when we talk about a small elite controlling all aspects of democracy, including media, For an outsider observer like myself, it seems that the US media has really stood up to Trump and Trumpism. Is that something do you agree with? And has Indian media like followed on similar lines, or has it fallen prey to Hindutva politics?
No, that is a suggestion that I would very strongly disagree with. Because what we see, what did Trump do? Trump challenged the orthodoxy of US strategy by saying that one, US should not be running these endless wars across the world, and there is no US national interest to be served by trying to export democracy. And he was an anti-war president, which goes against the establishment wisdom of Washington DC, the US State Department, the CIA or the FBI or the Pentagon. So they have a worldview which is again in the control of a particular thinking, which is completely at divergence with the interest of the working class that I mentioned earlier. So they think that a global trade, open borders, and the so-called war for democracy around the world is something that they pursue. Trump questioned that. Trump questioned that so stridently that the criticism of Trump actually comes or begins from that perspective. For example, Trump was an early advocate of better relations with Russia. Now, then this whole reporting on the Russia interference in the United States election, if you look at it, what is the allegation? The allegation is that Russia ran troll farms which posted Facebook messages. Now, is it a very logically rigorous point of view to say that if somebody sitting in Pakistan is posting Facebook messages about India, and that would you consider that as an interference in India's election?
No.
So anybody can. So the idea of Facebook is that anybody can
True.
post anything from anywhere. So there is no debate on the content of that was posted. So you actually go off tangent and you raise an entire debate on the Russia collusion, which was US media was parroting unnamed sources of US whatever, I don't want to know. From then till today, you take the most recent example of who blew up the Russia, Germany, the pipeline, the gas pipeline. So there is reporting from within the US, not in the mainstream media, saying that it was a US approved or US led operation that actually blew up that thing. There were some people who have actually cited Biden publicly saying there will not be that pipeline, we will ensure that that pipeline won't exist. But then you suddenly have reporting in US mainstream media quoting anonymous sources saying that some anonymous people on 2 boats went and blasted that thing. That beats all logic. You cannot accept that kind of it does not withstand basic scrutiny of fundamental journalism. But US mainstream media buys all these narratives, hook, line and sinker, and gives it to the US public. So as theoreticians of media like Edward Said or Gramsci all have said, so you create a consensus which is navigated, if not fully dictated, by the ruling segment, and the US media actually propagates that thing. That is broadly speaking. There are very, very big examples of people going out of their way, but then they actually fall on the wrong side of the US law. What is happening to Edward Snowden, for example? The irony is that he is now living in the Russia, which is
authoritarian.
So US democracy does not protect that freedom of information, if you want to call that thing. So US mainstream media essentially in a way reflects the interest or the thinking of the US strategic establishment. But there is a segment which is equally formidable in the United States, in the media, that questions everything that they represent. For example, Fox News, and there are far too many talk shows and radio shows which questions the narrative that the mainstream media, which is a mirroring of the strategic thinking that happens there. Now, since you talked about India, but in India what happens is, in India there is a larger confluence of what Hindutva represents, what the BJP's politics represents, and what India's deep state, India's establishment thinking about what Indian strategy, national interest, who are India's enemies, who are India's friends, how India should navigate its role in the world. There is a thinking around all that thing within that is like ingrained in our institutional formation of our defense infrastructure, defense establishment, and our security architecture. So the Indian media is in sync with that narrative right now. So on that fundamental point, both the Indian media and the US media are the same, which is that they are in sync with an establishment, a broadly accepted view of what the country's national interest is. In India, that is not being contested. Therefore, you don't see different kind of challenges which is from the media. In the United States, there is a deep contest because there is an equally strong segment which questions the very premise that this is our national interest. They say this is not our national interest. Fox News, if you watch, they say there is no US interest involved at all in the war in Ukraine. US is wasting this taxpayer money is being vacuumed out and being given to the elites within the US and being spent foolishly by the establishment. That is what the Fox News narrative is. So there is a contest in the United States about what is national interest and what is not. In India, there is not that much of a contest. Indian media broadly align with what India's national interest is, the fact that Pakistan is India's enemy, China is India's adversary, and all that thing. And all of them together considers BJP as a more able protector of the national interest. So that is a fundamental difference. On the other question, I would consider the mainstream media in India and the United States actually fall in the broad same category of echoing the acceptable or accepted view of what we are.
So Trump has gone against the established strategic thinking, and there's also a deep-seated belief among Trump supporters that for his anti-establishment views, the deep state wants to remove him. Recently, there was a leakage on the internet about national security documents relating to the war in Ukraine. Do you think that this leakage and the anti-establishment views and the popularity of Trump among new recruits might have adverse consequences for American national security?
Yeah, I mean, so Trump has literally no or very little support in the national security establishment in the United States. The debate on US national security or US national interest is more a popular one. So at some point, the United States establishment will have to come to terms with the fact that it's unending wars that they are doing for years on end, whether it is delivering for the US public. It is clear that it is not delivering, but at the same time, they deny that fact, and they create a meta-narrative. For example, this whole notion that Russia is coming, so protecting Ukraine is in the interest of the US, etc. So they are pushing that agenda, but Trump questions that agenda. A lot of people who think that what Trump says is right, but then the people who control the levers of power, they push back. They don't let that happen. Now the idea that the Washington's or the orthodox thinking in Washington is problematic, it is not actually Trump's. I have to bring that also point. Barack Obama, who was also a critique of how the United States thinks about its interest, as once famously said in an essay, I think the Atlantic wrote about the Obama doctrine. So he said there is a Washington playbook for everything. So in any global event, there is a playbook that suddenly will have to be deployed, and most of the times it involves use of force, military intervention. So Barack Obama said, I have not figured out why some of our friends are our friends and why some of our enemies are our enemies. Because these are all reasons beyond logical strategic reasoning. This is Barack Obama, I'm quoting, who is considered an antithesis of Trump, so to speak. But then Obama himself goes on to explain that there is a limit to how even a president can push or alter the Washington playbook, as he calls it. What Trump did is he did not bother about any of those diplomatic negotiations. He went hammer and tong on trying to unravel that Washington playbook. So that is where the conflict arises. How that will be resolved is one cannot say. But what is very clear is that in the United States there is a fundamental political debate, a conflict, which is on the question of who we are, our self-identity, collective self-identity. What do we stand for, and who are our enemies? The self, the enemy, and our collective social, the order. So on all these questions, there is a fundamental conflict which is undergoing. I don't think even this election will resolve it, but this election will actually bring up a lot of those questions to the fore once more.
You have written extensively on India-US ties, and I read your book, and I think you would agree that Indian diaspora is an important element that connects India to the world. Why does it seem that Indian diaspora, which wants an equal liberal democracy in West, supports religious polarization in India? It supports Hindutva politics, demand for a Khalistani nation. Why is that so? Why such divergence?
Well, I mean, it is very difficult to give a definitive answer to that question. But people who left India and living in a foreign land, there is a sense of dispossession. So this French sociologist Olivier Roy talked about them as the in-between people. You left your original home, but you've not really become where you are. So they try to resolve that conflict within them by trying to rationalize their exit from India by blaming it on other things. So, for example, it's a very standard argument that they did not want to leave India, but India was ABC things, therefore we left India. India, nobody cared for merit, it was about reservation, it was about no economic opportunity, and then you will go around to blaming it on maybe Nehru or socialism. All those things are strawman arguments, and then you also have a sense of a cultural ownership that is actually your, at one level, a safety net that you have for your next generation. Though we are living here, we have to be rooted where we came from. So that also, at some levels, metamorphoses into a kind of religious nationalism, which, as you rightly pointed out, very paradoxically, they oppose there, where their host countries, they are all for multiculturalism, but in their country of origin, they think that a cultural bonding and cultural nationalism or religious nationalism is a route to greatness and more power. So they also believe that, okay, if as an Indian, if they are not being respected enough in their perceived lack of respect that they might experience in their new home, is due to the weakness of India as a nation. So they believe that if India is military power or India is an economic superpower, all that can be achieved by, they hope, through a more heightened form of nationalism, will also reflect on their own existence, because they believe they come from a strong country. For example, there is a European living in the United States or in Australia will have a different social status, that is in perception, compared to an Indian, because of the cultural affinity and cultural and the economic and military power their countries. So perhaps they process it that way. So yeah, it is a very noticeable, remarkable feature of Indian diaspora, broadly speaking. But I also have to add one point, that the new generation of people who are born in the United States, so they process this slightly different. So they have actually looking at India from a different angle. They are not actually, though their parents may have wanted them to sort of acquire a certain kind of idea about Indian nationalism or Indian culture, they have processing it in a different manner, and that divergence is now apparent between the generation that is born in the US and people who've actually migrated from India and people who have reached the US from other countries like Indian Ocean nations and other places.
Thank you so much for giving us your valuable time. It was a very engaging conversation.